Hey guys, this is going to be a really quick video, hopefully. In this video, I want to showcase how we have on a recurring invoice the automatic quantity calculation, how it works, and how we can tie it to subscriptions. So like even if you don't have an integration in place, or if you do have an integration in place, how it ties to either software licenses or subscriptions. And we're not going to dive too far into the recurring invoice section of it, but we are going to showcase how we have the product in the item catalog. We're going to showcase how we have the recurring invoice. And we're going to showcase tying that to a subscription. In this case, it's going to be a manual subscription. So if you don't have an integration for something like Huntress, and you want to tie that in to be able to automatically set the number of on the invoice to the number of licenses being sold, you can do that. One of the key benefits with having this automatic quantity calculation is it allows you to set a minimum quantity even if you're tracking the invoice number, the quantity manually on the subscription level. You can just update that subscription or license without touching the invoice, and you can set that minimum quantity. So if it goes below, then it doesn't actually sell less than what that minimum quantity is. And that gives you a way to manually reconcile licensing, and it actually keeps a historical record and now a database of your licenses and stuff like that. So let me jump right into it, and let's show you what that looks like. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen like that, so I can see it. And again, we're in my, I'm always changing my Halo instances. This is the last Halo instance I've used last couple of times. We are in a version that's not yet available, I think. No, we're actually on the current beta. 2.131.5 was just released. And so if you are on beta, you will see the same features and functionality I'm going to showcase. I'm on 2.31.5. It was just made beta today. And so that is the version that you'll get if you're on the beta track. So yeah, you're not gonna see anything in here that you won't have access to, and hopefully everything should work correctly. With that being said, I'm gonna go through. We're gonna start from the beginning. We're gonna start from literally nothing. We're out of the box configuration minus whatever we did in previous videos. So in this case, I'm gonna jump into my products catalog, and I'm gonna go to recurring item, and we're going to create a item here for Huntress, right? So we're gonna use Huntress as our makeshift. Now, I'm reselling Huntress. I'm not calling it Huntress on the invoice. I don't want them to go look it up and figure out like what's going on. I'm just going to cover this to be something like, Rising Tide Secure EDR or something like that, right? Some sort of name for it. And it's going to be under the recurring invoice. It is a recurring product, and we do bill it monthly. And then we're not tracking stock because it's not a hardware inventory. We're not consigning it because there's no delivery for it. It's just a license. And we could build a project template to deploy Huntress if we wanted to. And so we can potentially look at that, but we saw that on previous videos, so I'm not going to do that here. And again, budget type, same thing. We can say it's a contract, but it's not really because we're not selling support. I like to say contracts should be used in order for you to bucket your time correctly. It allows you to do profitability reporting and all sorts of other fancy things, such as deferred revenue with prepay contracts and who knows what. So we're not going to do this right now, but if there was some kind of support agreement that you would put around supporting Huntress, then that product would be a contract. And that would be where you'd bucket that time so you can see how profitable that kind of support package you're offering actually is. In this case, we're not doing that. We're going to keep moving forward, and we are going to invoice it on sales orders. So this is a tricky one. Oftentimes people are like, well, don't invoice it on a sales order. It's a recurring item. So we're going to just create a recurring invoice, and we're not going to invoice it from a sales order. I actually like to go the other way. We don't know when that recurring invoice is going to start necessarily. It could start later on. So, and we always like to start ideally a recurring invoice in the beginning of a month. So what I end up doing is I do invoice on a sales order, and I do that whatever time the sales order is created and whatever that quote is approved. And then I immediately invoice the rest of that month manually one time. And I set the recurring invoice to start the period 1 month later. So if it's in the middle of January and you order it, you're going to be billed for half of January through the sales order invoice. And then we're going to set the recurring invoice to start up as of February, which will be a brand new month for you. So we're not going to get into the whole thing. That's just one way of doing it. That's what I like to do. There's 10 different ways you can do something like that. That's just an example. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and leave that unchecked. And we're going to go forward. Now, we're not going to see half the stuff anyways because we're not going through a quote, sales order, and so on. But we are going to be putting it on a recurring invoice. We're going to go ahead and set this price. We're going to say, you know what, we're going to charge $4 an agent for Huntress. And our cost is somewhere around like $230 or something like that, right? Now, these are not real numbers, obviously. It's going to be completely dependent on what tier you are with Huntress, but I'm going to go ahead and populate what this is so we can get our markup and discount availability, and we can do overriding costs if we want to. And we're going to move forward through the billing tab, and we're going to say exclude from accounting integration because I don't have an accounting integration. I don't want to get stuck up on that right now. So now I have my product, Rising Tide Secure EDR. I've got my costing and pricing, and I can go to recurring invoice and start building that out. So I'm going to jump into the customer that we're going to be using, which is Mendy Online. I believe is, yep, here we go. So this is going to be my test customer. I'm going to go to my recurring invoices tab, and I'm just going to start creating a recurring invoice. And here we're going to do add recurring item, and we're going to choose the Huntress Rising Tide Secure EDR. It's not called Huntress, right? It's not, we're not tracking stock, so it's unlimited. And we're going to say we're going to put in like, I don't know, 10 or 15 or whatever quantity we're going to set this to. We're going to set this to the main site. We don't have an agreement, so that's fine. We'll set the schedule to occur. Like I said, I'm going to do 1 month later. So we're going to set the start date to be, let's say December 1st. We're going to charge for November because by the time this gets signed. So December 1st will happen monthly, and we're not going to set an end date. We're going to create on holidays. We're going to mark this active, and we're going to set this to be starting on, let's say 10 a.m. that day. Okay, cool. Yeah, 10 a.m. And then we're going to go ahead and save. All right, so that's the schedule. Now we've got the recurring invoice. I can go ahead and save this. Now this doesn't really help me because now if I get a license change, so Huntress emails me a report of my used agents, or I log into the Huntress portal and I see the number of agents used by this client, I have to go in here and edit this quantity manually from 10 to 11 or 12 or 5 or 6 or something like that. Now, if they've agreed upon a contract to a minimum that they're going to be paying for, even if they drop below that minimum, I don't know what that minimum was. I got to go look up the contract. I got to go find it out. There's no way for me to see from here what that minimum actually is. And so I don't like that option. What I would rather do is come here and change the quantity to be choose a calculate quantity from a subscription count on creation. And you can do all sorts of different options. License count is another similar thing to subscription count. We're going to ignore that. We're going to focus on subscriptions right now. And at this point, I can go ahead and click add, and I can choose a subscription available. Now, right now, there is no Huntress available. So I'm going to leave this all for right now, and it's going to calculate all of them. And I'm going to set my minimum quantity to 10, and I'm going to hit save. Now, if I hit save here, notice that I now have this icon next underneath the quantity. That means it's calculating from some sort of entity. If it was a user, you'd see a user icon. If it was a asset, you'd see an asset icon or workstation icon. If it's a license or subscription, you see this kind of like file or document icon indicating as such. Notice it's set to 0 right now. I'm going to go ahead and save it, and we should see it flip back to 10 because the minimum quantity is set to 10. That's all fine and good, but where's the Huntress subscription? Right, so now let's go back into the client. We're going to go to Mendy Online here. We're going to flip over to the subscriptions here, and I'm going to go ahead and create my Huntress subscription. And so I'm just going to set the name Huntress. They're starting with 10, and I can track. The more information I put in here, the better it is for tracking purposes. There's no real functional thing at this point. I can just come in here and hit save, and that'll work, right? But none of the information is set, and so I don't know what happened from a historical perspective. So I can come here, I can flip back to my recurring invoice. I can edit this, and I can modify this to say, instead of doing all subscriptions, that means if I have Huntress and I've got ThreatLocker and I don't know, any kind of other subscription, it's going to take the quantity across all of them and it's going to include it. I don't want that to happen. This product, Rising Tide Secure EDR, specifically is linked to, or should be, or corresponds with what's supposed to be the Huntress subscription. So I'm going to edit this line, and I'm going to choose the Huntress subscription specifically from this dropdown and hit save at this point. And then we're going to save this, and we should be able to save that invoice. And now we're still at 10. If I go back in, we should see that that line is now reflected with Huntress instead of all at that point. Now, who can see that Huntress, right? Remember I said I'm reselling Huntress with a different name. I don't want people to know it's Huntress necessarily or something like that. I'm white labeling it. So you can change, you can call it subscription whatever you want. It doesn't have to be called Huntress. But who can see it is basically if your customer, if your client has an Halo agent account, that they can log in and see their own client in Halo, and they have access to the software licenses area, which is a permission you can configure, then they can see that. Otherwise, it's completely invisible to them, and they don't know what it is. So you can call it Huntress so that you know what it is internally, and you can track that. let's go back here. Let's make some additional changes. We're going to move this number of licenses to 15. And we're going to set the start date. We're going to say we're starting November 1st. Our end date's never. It's going to be unlimited. Our billing cycle, we're going to say, is monthly. And again, this is just information that's being logged in here. For right now, it doesn't do anything really. But for the most part, this is going to start being used to capture NCE information from something like PAX8, or so that we can determine, are we on an active commitment with the subscription that's coming in automatically, and then we can start doing triggers and things like that off of it. But as of right now, not much happens with it. We're going to come here. We can set the supplier. Huntress is not really a supplier, but we can create it. And so we can tie the license to a supplier, and then we can come in and say, hey, show me all subscriptions across this supplier and which clients have them, right? So we can literally build out this documentation of sorts inside of Halo, and then the manufacturer is more or less the same thing. We can include a purchase price and selling price. And again, this stuff can be restricted so that you can hide these fields from agents who should not have access to it. And it's primarily for reporting purposes as of right now. It does not tie back to the product or on the invoice in any way, shape, or form as of yet. Notice I'm making these changes. So now it's 15. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And now we come in here and we can see that we've actually bumped from 10 to 15. If we go back to our recurring invoice and we refresh this page, which I think the easiest way to do is just to edit and save. No, we just close and reopen it. We'll just do that. And we'll go back to our client, which we've lost. Mendy Online, here we go. And we'll go to our recurring invoice and go into Mendy Online. And so now we can see we actually have a proration that occurred +5 because it automatically found that change that occurred. And so we can come in here and we can actually look at those pro rata lines here to indicate that we're adding 5 at that point, right? And we can see what period it's for and how much we're doing and so on and so forth. Now, if I come back and let's just save that. So this is automatic quantity. If I go back to my subscription and I drop that number down, 15, and I just make this 6, let's say. Save that. And then we go back to our recurring invoice, and let's just reopen that up again. So now we're at 10 again, right? Because the minimum quantity is 10. And so the periodic lines are gone probably because there's nothing to prorate at this point. Well, it's still there. So we can actually see the history -5 because it was all within the same day. And so we're back to the minimum quantity of 10. And that's why we're showing 10, even though it's 6. If I were to remove that minimum quantity and just make that 0 and save this and save this and save that, we're up to 6 at that point. Okay. And so that's basically how it works. So there are 2 parts to this. Again, the item in the product catalog is not directly related to the software subscription or license. It's the item in the product catalog going to the invoice. And then we're just taking that quantity calculation and we're saying, what are we basing that quantity calculation on? Is it off of a license? Is it off of a subscription? Is it off a user, number of users, and so on and so forth? Something like this allows us to basically say, if we're bringing in custom assets, if we're bringing custom fields on our assets, and one of those custom fields is whether or not Huntress is deployed, that'll allow us to say, hey, calculate the quantity based off the number of assets that have this custom field set to be Huntress or true, to sets the Huntress field to true or something like that, so that we don't have to actually go manage that subscription manually. One of the other things that you can do, though, is you can do it through the API. Updating the actual subscription itself is a simple call to the API with a couple of parameters. And so if I come in here and I'll go to inspect and just dock my development tools into the browser so you can see how it works. Remember, the API itself, the UI itself is just a wrapper around the API. So anything that we want to do in Halo through a script, we just have to jump into API tools, development tools on the network tab and watch what happens when we do it in the interface. So I'm going to bump this back up to 12 and I'm going to hit save. And we're going to see the software license tab, software license call that gets made. So we're going to expand this a bit. We're just making a post request, which is a type of HTTP call. And it's going to the API software license path. And all we're doing is we're passing a payload of the specific client ID, which is Mendy Online, which is 20. The type of license we're doing. So 0 is software license, 1 is subscriptions. It's really all that means. the new count that's happening, we're going to 12, and then what license ID. And so if we look up here, notice our license ID equals 2, right? So it is the second license ID we have in the system. So there's going to be a 1, this is a 2, 1 may be deleted, the IDs don't really go down or don't really get used or shouldn't get used if it's a proper database. And so that's basically it. So we can just take this payload and pass it into Halo requests to the web API resource of software license using a post method, and then we can push that quantity up. And that once that quantity changes, then the invoice will automatically go for it. We can use this method to track any license from any system, allowing you to set minimum quantities on the recurring invoice. And so therefore your method, your process becomes less about changing the invoice, which is a one-time set and forget, and everything it revolves around updating the subscription or updating the license or updating the user or something like that. And that can happen automatically, or that can happen manually, that can happen through a spreadsheet import, whatever it is that you want to do in order to make this work for you. Anyways, I hope this was helpful. I hope this was enlightening. And if you have any questions about this process, feel free to hit me up. Thanks for watching.